All right, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about useEffect, which is another hook. So let's go ahead and create a new example here, and we'll call this like useEffect example. Okay, let's create a new file. Okay. Export default function, useEffect example, like so. Okay, so useEffect is a hook that looks like this, useEffect. And my IDE automatically completes it for me as soon as I type useEffect or part of it, and I press enter, and it gives me this essentially this kind of like shim code for it. So let's take a look at it. So we have our parentheses here, and useEffect takes two different arguments. The first argument is a function of which it will execute when it executes this particular effect. The second argument is inside of these square braces, and it's an array, essentially, of values that it should look at. And if they change, it will fire this function here that we have passed in to the useEffect hook. Now, if you have a blank array like this, for example, it will fire this function the first time that this component renders, okay? And only the first time that it renders. So it's important to keep this in mind. So if you've used older versions of React where things were more class-based, there used to be a method on the functions that was called like onComponentMount or something along those lines. And this is essentially the same effect, but we're using a hook in order to do this operation. And this is extremely helpful in a number of ways. Typically, the way that you're going to use it is you want to execute some kind of code when the component first mounts. And by mounts, I mean essentially the first time it ends up getting rendered inside of your project. And you need some kind of setup code for your component. This is where you use useEffect. If you want to, for example, calculate some kind of side effect based on the change of a prop or another hook value changes in some way, and you need to do some kind of recalculation based on that, you would use useEffect for it. So this is an extremely helpful hook. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to use this. I think one thing that should be mentioned too, probably before we get a little too far, is the useEffect hook renders after the render happens for the component. So keep that in mind as well. So let's say, trying to think of a good example on a simple example of how we could use this. So let's go ahead and let's put a container in here like we have been doing. What kind of setup code could we potentially use here? We could do something really wacky like this should be use state like so. And then inside of here, we could just have like set value 20, and this will just run one time only, for example. And then down here, we'll have a div, and it'll say value, and we'll put our value right here. I think this will probably work. I actually haven't tested this out beforehand, because I too like to live dangerously. So let's see what happens. And we see here our value is equal to 20. So it does exactly what we expected it to do. So the flow of the component here is the component starts out and it starts rendering. And then as it starts rendering, I mean, it's just a function. So it executes linearly, right? So it goes through the process here. It renders the component. It sets up the state. The default state ends up being set to 10. This component returns this JSX here. It returns a value, and at that time, the value is 10. After this component, that is the component rendering, is when it returns a value. Okay, just so that we're on the same page on what the terminology means. Okay, so it returns this value. Then this hook is going to fire, and it is going to set the value to 20. This, by calling set value, will cause this component to re-render because we are setting the value from a useState hook here. And then, so this value will be 20. In order to prove this, I will just, we'll console log the value here. And then we'll come back here and reload the page. And we see we have two outputs. So the first output is 10, and then the second output is 20, and that's exactly what I'm trying to explain to you. So the first pass, it's 10. This hook ends up running. And if we want to prove that the hook is running, we can just do something like this. useEffect, right? So we should see 10, then useEffect, then 20. If I reload this page. So 10, useEffect, and 20, like so. And that is how you use useEffect. Now, we can take this slightly farther by maybe doing some kind of like a little more of a complex example. So let's say, let's just do something like this. Okay, set first. So let's just say we have two numbers like this. So the first number will be 10 and the second number will be 5. And then let's just make a child component here, and we'll call this adder, like this. Export default function. Call this an adder. And we'll make an interface of props. And it takes a first, which is a number. And it takes a second, a number. And then I'm just going to set up my props here as well. First, second. And then we want to return a div like this. And inside of here, we will have a const. I'll call this value and set value. If I could type today. And this will just be a number. And we'll just output the value right here. And we'll use useEffect here. And we can have it watch the first and the second number like this. So if either of these values change, we essentially are going to execute this function that's right here like this. And then let's say for the value, we want to set the value to first plus second, like so. And so this will dynamically update this value every time these two values change. So let's go back to our initial script. And let's, I think we need to make just a slight change to our adder here, just so that it's the same. And then I'll add the adder component here, and it'll be first, and this will be second. I just realized we have this. Like so. And then what we're going to do is put a button down here like so. Just as we've done in the past, and we'll add the onClick handler, and we'll just write a quick let's just have it change the values. And we're going to need some kind of output here. So we have first, and second will be this second. And then function on click, as we've done in the past. And we'll hook this up to the on click, like so. And then we'll just set our first to be first +1, and our second to be second +2, let's just say, as a basic example here. Now, because I removed useEffect here, I just need to clean this up a little bit. Imports, it won't actually break anything if you import stuff that you don't use, but okay, so back to our example. I'm just going to reload this real quick. And we see that our first is set to 10 and our second is set to 5. And inside our value here, we have 15. So let's just go back to our adder here. And we'll console.log this. And when we use effect, we'll see the message use effect in our console. Just to prove to you that it is working as you expect it to. Okay. So we click this, and we're seeing the use effect at work here. And everything is updating automatically for us. 16 plus 17 is 33. 18 plus 21 is 39, and so on and so forth. So this is just a really basic example on how this works. But basically, anytime you need to trap any kind of value, whether it's a value that might come from a hook like useState or a different kind of hook, or from your props, and you need to do some kind of recalculation, this is an excellent option. Now, there's one thing that I haven't talked about here with useEffect, and it's that what you can return a function from this inner function here, right? So I can return some other function like so. Although this doesn't actually do anything, so it's not that helpful, but right, like so. Now, this is great, for example, when you have to hook, like, for example, certain DOM events of some kind, where this you can use up here as your setup code. For example, I'm going to listen for some kind of event, and then this function is executed whenever this component is removed from the DOM. So if you need to do some kind of cleanup work of some kind, then you would run it in between these two curly braces, for example. Okay. So it gives you all the flexibility you need to look at values or set up your component and then deconstruct it properly without having to do a bunch of extra work. So this is a very helpful hook, one you will use very much, and I imagine maybe in some of the examples we end up writing in the future, we'll see a lot about that as well. So use it, it's very good, and let's move on.